Hello everyone, Santier here, and at long last I'm going to record a Tears of the Kingdom review. This is more analysis focused in many regards. There will be spoilers, and I will inevitably be talking about things from Breath of the Wild, including DLC from that game, because it's going to be very relevant to this discussion. So, let's just go ahead and start with this game is big. Very big. Like, Breath of the Wild was quite a large game, and Tears of the Kingdom, like, so much bigger. Part of that is because they were like, what if we just copied this entire map and made an underground version? Very interesting thing with the underground that it took a little while for me to figure out, but that I think is really cool, is it's basically taking the topography of Hyrule and inverting it. So where Hyrule goes up, it goes down, and where Hyrule goes down, it goes up. And then bodies of water are where you have those walls, those blocked off areas. So that took me a little bit to figure out, but it was really neat when I did. Now, because the game is so big, I have not done 100% everything in it. I've gotten a respectable, row and a half of hearts and a full stamina wheel, so I've done quite a few of the shrines, but not all of them. I've gotten all of the sages. I've beaten the main story. I've gotten the Master Sword. Probably a few other things that are worth mentioning, but so I've done a lot of the game, but I've not done all of the side quests. I've not done all of the shrines. I've not gotten all of the Pony Point rewards. I assume that eventually starts resulting in free sleepover tickets because you get them from the sign-holding guy, whose name I'm blanking on right now, because it's been a little bit since I've actually played the game. But I haven't started receiving those as rewards yet, so maybe there's something useful locked away in there, but I'm pretty high in rewards on that. Which will be relevant to discussion in a moment. So the game is very, very big. There's a few things that I've been mentally trying to figure out what order to try to talk about things in, because there's a lot of things that this game does that I really like. For example, I really like the way that they handled the transition of Hyrule overall. One sticking point there, what happened to all the Sheikah stuff is not really addressed. All of the Guardians are just gone. All of the Sheikah-made shrines are gone, replaced with the Zonai ones, with no real comment on that. From a world-building standpoint, that bothers me. The Sheikah Towers also just gone, replaced by the Skyview Towers. Again, what happened to all of the Sheikah Slate and all of that stuff? It's really weird to me that it's just gone. I would have liked to have seen the Guardian remnants still in places. I would have liked to have seen something with those. There's a few holdouts still, like the royal weapons that are Sheikah made and stuff like that. But it feels very strange to me that all the Sheikah stuff is just gone. But overall, I think they did a really good job of updating the world, of moving NPCs around. The world feels fabulously connected within itself, of people referencing other places, and everything feels like it's in a world. And NPCs have grown up, they've aged, stuff has moved around, people have moved around, a lot of changes have happened. So they took the Breath of the Wild map, they modified a ton of stuff, they added a bunch of caves to it, and then they made the underground and the above ground. However, this is where the biggest problem that I had with the game is. Like I said, there's a lot that I liked, but traversal, once again, is a huge... There's so many pain points here. The world is big, and there's so much to get around. Now, it's the same problem. Breath of the Wild had the same problem. The horse. My arm for friggin' the Ocarina of Time. Give me Epona's song. I don't know why. So for those who aren't experienced with Ocarina of Time, and what I'm referencing, this was the first 3D Zelda game, and it had a mount. It had Epona. You could ride Epona around Hyrule Field and a couple of other adjacent areas, and you could you had an item called the Ocarina of Time, which was an input mechanism for basically casting magic spells, if you want to think of it that way. But it's for playing songs, and these songs had magical effects. So you could play it to teleport yourself to different locations, similar to how you can open up the map in Tears of the Kingdom and teleport to places. And one of the songs that you got is a Epona song that when you play it, if Epona, your horse, can be in that location, she'll teleport to that location effectively. Now, this was a problem that I had in Breath of the Wild. Your horse can't climb cliffs, but you can. Your horse can't jump down cliffs and go paragliding off, but you can. And so, a problem in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is horses seem really cool, but are practically useless so often. And I mean, from a practical standpoint, they are useless because as soon as you get to any sort of terrain that they can no longer traverse, be that going up or down, you have to leave them behind. And then, yes, there's the call your horse if it's nearby button, the whistle, that functionally doesn't do very much. Now, Breath of the Wild addressed this. It addressed this through a DLC item that you could get that was horse armor stuff, the saddle and bridle, that would teleport your horse to you when you use the horse call button. That addresses so much of the problem. And the thing is, that gets me, is they put so much work into these horse systems, making the horse somewhat intelligent and how it controls when it's moving at different speeds, and the fact that it can follow along roads, and all of these animations related to it reacting to the environment, and these different stats. And so there's so much, they added this saddle harness for your horse to be able to pull stuff, that you can hook that up to things that you build, and so your horse can pull stuff in Tears of the Kingdom. They added this, but without that teleporting horse equipment that lets you summon your horse to where you actually are, you fast travel and you have to leave your horse behind. There's so many instances in the game where you have to leave your horse behind. And so I'm not going to run back to where my horse is to go collect it, and I'm not going to be beholden to the stables. And this, again, was a problem in Breath of the Wild, and they addressed it with the DLC that gives you the stuff to teleport your horse to you. I kept expecting to get that as a reward for pony points. It's possible it is, but if it is, it's way too friggin' deep, because that equipment, the Sheikah bridle and saddle, I think probably is what it was called, but that equipment, that teleporting horse armor is what I think of it as. But that equipment does so much to address a fundamental challenge with the rest of the design of the game of, you've put so much work into this elaborate horse system, but as soon as I see something interesting up that cliff, I have to leave my horse behind to go up there and get that interesting thing, and I might not want to go back down the cliff to get my horse. Never minding the fact that I can't bring a horse into the underground, where it'd be quite convenient. Skeleton horses are there; you can ride them. They're very nice if you get one. But that's a huge frustration point. Of why did you make this elaborate horse system and then make it just impractical to actually use a horse so often? Now, there is the Ultra Hand and Auto Build ability to make vehicles. This is just straight up inferior to the Master Cycle Zero or whatever it was, the rune that you got. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I played Elden Ring before I played Tears of the Kingdom. And Elden Ring has this ring that you can... It's the explanation. You can basically just summon a spiritual, horse, mount thing, whatever torrent is. You can summon and unsummon it at will. And you just, boom, there's a horse. I've also been playing Guild Wars 2. and finally getting mounts in that. And you just push a button to mount or unmount. Having to go through the whole rigmarole of, is my horse even nearby? Never minding that. Okay, if I want a vehicle, building just a random vehicle, sure, you can use auto build. That consumes zoonite. It should use capsules first, in my opinion, that you have on hand before it uses zoonite. That would have been a really good decision, because otherwise you're spending time figuring out what capsules you want to pull out to get parts, what environmental things you have, or do you have a bunch of zoonite that you're willing to spend on a vehicle that maybe you're going to just abandon in a short bit, plus they will break after a while. It's a system that is on paper really cool and in practice is technically extremely impressive. The vehicle building system, the Ultra Hand / auto build system, very technically impressive. People have done some really impressive building things with it, but it is finicky. If I am building something with Ultra Hand, it is very finicky, and if I don't want to just blow a bunch of zoonite on something that I might not even be using that much, or is like, okay, this is a one-time flight, it feels bad to me to spend a bunch of zoonite on making a hot air balloon, and like I can pull some hot air balloon parts out of my pocket if I have capsules on hand, but that's another resource I'm expending. And it's just the process of making a vehicle, while it's, like I said, very cool technically, it is initially very cool. There's neat things that you can do with this system. It is I did not enjoy the Ultra Hand that much. A good replacement for Magnesis for manipulation puzzles. And there's some cool stuff with attaching things together and some cool puzzles that they do with that. But in terms of making vehicles, I did not care for the vehicle making mechanic. I would have liked something more like the Master Cycle Zero, which was another DLC reward from Breath of the Wild. You got it as a rune. It required you to fuel it with items, so like monster parts, for example. And so you needed to fuel it, but you could just summon it when you wanted. You can run away. You could resummon it whenever you wanted. You could yeet it off a cliff, and it did not care. You could just resummon it. And so that did so much to address the traversal problems, even more so than teleporting horse armor. The traversal problems that I had with Breath of the Wild. I wanted something like that in Tears of the Kingdom. And the fact is, I basically spent so much of my time just running around manually, or like going to a Skyview Tower to be able to paraglide or whatever, because making a vehicle felt like a waste of resources. It felt impractical to me. If I'm auto building something, what's even on hand for me to use? It's just the system was not something that I liked. And getting around in Tears of the Kingdom, it's big. One hand, that's cool. On the other hand, I have to get across this danged space, and it is enormous. And it's a pain in the butt to get across this huge space. Those are my main complaints, or points that I disliked about the game. There's so much more that I liked about it, and that's what I really kind of want to focus on. There's some cool new Korok puzzles that took a little bit to figure out. I liked the feel of the underground area. Boy, I'm trying to use too many words at once. It reminded me a lot of Subnautica and the feeling that I got from being underwater in that game. And I think that was very intentional to give it that underwater feel. But they did a really good job with it. It made it very spooky. I liked the feeling of the darkness. I liked the feeling of pushing the darkness back as you light up light roots. I really would have liked Frox's to be a little bit more findable. I kept finding obsidian and blue-white Froxes, but not just regular Froxes. I needed Frox Fangs for upgrading my some of my armor. But I liked the feel of that. The Sky Islands also fairly cool. Navigating between them could be kind of annoying, but that's in the navigation stuff that I've talked about previously. And I liked the what they did with the new tutorial area and that setup. I think that was really good. It connected a bit. It did some interesting stuff, like compared to the Great Plateau from Breath of the Wild. I overall liked. Okay, so the fuse mechanic, I think, overall does a lot of really cool stuff. One of the things that I like that they did is they made damage types hyper relevant in this game. There's stuff that you need a blunt weapon to address, and there's so many different things to kind of talk about at once. But breakable rocks, because you no longer have an infinite supply of bombs, because remote bombs is no longer a power that you have. So I like that you have the alternative of bludgeoning these things open. I think that was a really good way to address that. And often, if you have a deep thing, they'll have claymores and rocks, so you can keep replacing as things break. But fuse, so damage types, there's some stuff that you really need to slash as well. So they've done a really good job of especially differentiating, like your typical physical damage types of slashing or cutting or whatever you want to call it, bludgeoning or strike or blunt. There's so many different names for these, and piercing or poking if you wanted to call it that. But piercing is like piercing. Yes, that's clearly what that is. That's what an arrow does. That's what a spear does. And then it's like slashing. Yeah, that's what a sword does. And then like 3 different things for the other one. But anyway, that's meta commentary on terminology and games aside. But they've clearly differentiated those really well with like vines that you can't just beat open, you need to cut them, and then different enemies that in particular is like, okay, you want bludgeoning type stuff to be able to deal with these armored up enemies. And enemy variety, boy, did they increase that a lot. That was really neat. I really appreciated having, like, you have the Bokoblin chieftains. You have the addition of likes, the Horriblins, several others as well. Although I have to actively think about, because it has been a little bit since I last played the game. Think through all of the different things that they did, but it definitely, I felt the increase. But yeah, going back to Fuse, overall I really like it. The needing to try to do different types is interesting to me. The explanation for why weapons break, of they've been affected by this thing and are decaying, I think that works to explain stuff. Oftentimes your weapon could look kind of dumb, which means you don't care as much when it breaks. That's kind of my feeling. But overall, Fuse system, really cool. Glad there's an NPC that lets you unfuse stuff if you don't know. In Terrytown, there's the Goron kid in Terrytown, for a 20 rupee fee, can break stuff apart. That said, one of the other cool things that they did is they took a bunch, I think it is a bunch of stuff that was on Amiibo in Breath of the Wild, but they took a bunch of past Zelda things, like armor from Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, the OG Zelda games on the NES sort of era as well, Wind Waker, and they put a bunch of armor in chests and a bunch of weapons, and I love that you can buy those weapons again from Pose when they break. That's really cool. From the bargainer statues, rather, for Pose, not from Pose. Anyway, that's all cool and hunky-dory. I like that you can get the goddess sword from the one goddess statue, although replacing that one is a bit more expensive. we'll talk about the economy in a bit. Uh, but you can also get like I said, these historical weapons. So you can get like the Bigoran sword. You can get the twin helix blade of the fierce deity from Majora's Mask. Um, the boomerang from Wind Waker for some random reason. There's a bunch of them. It's really cool. And then you confuse with them, which oftentimes ran counter to it's really cool to wield. Like, oh, cool, I found the Bigoran sword. Oh no, I've stuck a rock to the end of it. That feels a little like I get it. That's the systems. I kind of just want the Bigoran sword to be the Bigoran sword, though, and it's better to stick stuff on the end of it because it makes it deal more damage, but it also makes it not feel like the Bigoran sword anymore. Especially if you put something on it that overrides the blade. So I have some conflicting feelings about that particular slice of the intersection between you introduced a bunch of cool references to previous Zelda games and also the fuse mechanic. That particular sliver of intersection, eh, eh, not. I don't quite like that, but overall, I like those two systems. Um, Recall is really friggin' cool, and I underutilized it like crazy. I eventually realized that I could use it in the fights against those block guys when they float up and then they send those things down at you, and I'm like, oh wait, I can climb on those and recall them to get back up to them. Like it is immensely versatile, way more so than I really utilized it because it took me so freaking long to realize how versatile it was. I kept forgetting I had it because it's like, oh yeah, you use this to get on rocks to go up. But it's things like you can grab a platform, move it around with Ultra Hand, climb on it, and then recall that platform to make your own elevate, to make your own moving platform. Like this is crazy. What it's amazing, and I deeply underutilized recall. Feel like I also really liked Ascend. Ascend was really really neat. Um, it gave good options for navigating the world and especially going up. Um, I find it really interesting how many ways that they kind of addressed player complaints about Breath of the Wild. They still kept durability because it's such a core part of the reward cycle, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think, like I said, the fuse makes that feel different. Um, but they also addressed people not liking losing grip in the rain with increased grip effects, like tonics that you can make to increase your grip, and also the frog armor. I enjoyed the quest chain with Pen at the stables. There's a lot of quest chains that I quite liked. So I enjoyed the ones with Pen. I enjoyed the troop and getting the great fairies. I think that was really cool as well. I liked that. Like so in Breath of the Wild, you unlock the four great fairies by dropping a giant pile of change on them. I liked having it be a more involved quest process, of finding these troop members and doing like getting the band back together and that getting the great fairies out as well. Um, I also liked what they did with past Zelda stories. Like so in Breath of the Wild, the story was more about what happened 100 years ago in the past, right? And you've got some of what's going on now, but a lot of the narrative is focused on what happened 100 years ago in the past. And so you'd get these memories because Link has amnesia after going through a healing process. And you can go to locations that trigger his memories and then help him remember what happened in the past. And they adapted that idea really nicely with sending Zelda bajillions of years in the past. I don't even know how long ago she's supposed to be. It's 10,000 years plus change. That's all I know is how far back she's supposed to be. So, um, I liked what they did with the geoglyphs and the dragon's tears. I was because they called them dragon's tears, and the way that they kind of presented stuff, is able to connect. Oh wait, these are coming from Zelda. Um, because she ate the rock to become a dragon. These are her tears. Like I was able to connect that before the game itself like had the big reveal of that. Fun fact: uh, I also figured out where the Master Sword was by going down, and in the very opening part when you are walking down the area where you run across Ganondorf. They've done a lot of good stuff with that cutscene, by the way, which you only realize later, like if you rewatch the opening sequence. Um, but uh, the murals that you come across there that Zelda geeks out about, and I love how much of a nerd she is. It's great. Um, but there's a couple that are blocked by rocks. If you go down there later, which I did, before figuring out where the Master Sword was, I broke those, and that's how I figured out where the Master Sword is. And I think it's really cool that there's several different routes that you could take to figure that out. So I enjoyed the way that they then handled memories being like stuff from her, then additional like the slabs from the petal shaped island things where the court official had recorded notes. I think that was a really cool system to have as well. So there's a lot of cool systems I think that they had of like talking about things that happened in the past, but they also did a good job of making the world feel like there was a story happening in the present day as well, and not just in the past. And I think that's something that they improved on considerably in Tears of the Kingdom, because Breath of the Wild didn't have as much of a present day story. So I think they did a good job of kind of having story lore stuff that you're uncovering as you go from the past as well as the present. And on that note, I liked what they did with advancing the different, like the different regional stories. In particular, the Imposter Zelda story, it just happened to work out really well with the order that I did things in. So I did the dungeons, Rito, Gerudo, Zora, Goron, and also with the order in which I did stuff with some of the pen quests in there as well. The Imposter Zelda plotline played out just like perfectly, because I ended with the sort of the way it was being revealed, and the way it tied together with then going after Phantom Ganon and all of that worked out extremely well for me. I don't know if there's I imagine it's got to be kind of the same cutscenes each time, but it's just the way that the order in which I approached things happened. It kept the what's this Zelda, the imposter reveal, like perfectly timed, and like it didn't get revealed early from any of the dragon memories either, because I know that is revealed in one of them there, and it lined up beautifully for me in particular in my playthrough, and I enjoyed that like sneaky aspect of Phantom Ganon. Oh man, yeah. Also, the addition of those, I I don't know, malice pools. I don't know what people technically call them. You beat the hands that make me think of the dead hands from Wind Waker, um, that the gloom puddles or whatever, and they make everything all. They are so terrifying. Initially, I do miss Guardians as an enemy. I will add. I appreciate the addition of the variant forms of the Zonai guys, but I do miss the Guardians. The panic of the laser sound effect going on you, but also the mastery of being able to like parry those beams back was really cool. So I do kind of miss that. But yeah, I enjoyed the present day story as well, and overall what they're doing with a lot of the narrative and a lot of the lore of the game. Um, there's a lot of really cool stuff that they did with that I enjoyed a good bit. And also just like interesting world building stuff with like the discrepancies in um, the aging rates of the different races. Did a lot of interesting things in that way. Um, I also really liked that Master Koga falling down a bottomless pit in Breath of the Wild was used. Like you beat him, he falls down a bottomless pit. This was a really funny thing. So I was talking with my sister about this because she likes to watch me play Zelda games, and I explained what happened to Master Koga and did not connect the dots, but she did. And she thought that I had already done so. It was really funny. Of like, oh yeah, we beat Master Koga last time, and he fell down a bottomless pit, sort of thing. She's like, oh, that's how he ended up in the underground. I'm like, and it dawned on me, and she thought I'd already known. It was really funny, but I like that they played around with that. I thought that was a really clever way of handling that. Um, and yeah, exploring down there was really cool. I liked that some of the dungeon stuff took place down there. I had okay, so talking about the dungeons, actually, I should probably do that. Um, a lot of the shrine puzzles have been fairly interesting. Some it's taken me a while to figure out how they work. So, some of the stuff with Zonai devices took me a while to kind of understand and grasp, which is fine. Um, so the Rito one, yeah, that one had a bunch of different levels and flying around. That one was fine. Um, they all kind of followed the pattern of get to all of the switches and then that opens the door to the boss fight. Although I think the boss fights were all fairly decent. I could not figure out like boy, I going to the Gerudo 1 second. I went to that one maybe a wee bit early, but I really liked Riju. Um, and I still really like Riju. And there's a lot of emotional moments from the narrative. Actually, they did a really good job with the narrative. For me personally, this is one of those things. Actually, I want to take a moment to just to state, I I try to be very careful about separating facts from opinion. Everybody has their own tastes. Own your tastes. It's fine. You do not have to have a logical reason for your tastes. Your tastes are emotionally driven, not logically driven. Uh, One of the problems that we have in our society is that people feel the need to justify their tastes. You do not. Your tastes justify like like you have facts that justify why you like things according to your tastes. But like it's fine. If you did not like the story, that's fine. If you thought the vehicle building was really cool and you loved it and you thought it was the best thing in the game, awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed that. I wish I enjoyed that like you did for the vehicle building. Um, anyway, the doing the Gerudo dungeon second was quite rough because I did not have a ton of hearts and I kept getting one shot by things, but I got through it eventually. I feel like there was some parts of the Zora dungeon, the water temple, that I did a bit wonky. Uh, but the Goron one, I could not figure out navigating that thing, whatever the supposed to way. But I love this is one of the things that they've done so well. Both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom do this superbly well. They give you a suite of tools, and it's up to you to figure out how you want to solve puzzles. If you cannot figure out how to navigate this thing, then fine. You don't have to navigate it that way. You can just like climb and ascend and put strap rockets to your shields, and there's a bajillion different ways that you can address navigating this space. And I really like that. I really appreciate that they give you a bunch of different ways of being able to navigate these spaces, a bunch of different ways of being able to solve puzzles. You see it in shrines, you see it in the dungeons, and I really, really like that. That's something that the games do phenomenally well. So let's talk a little bit about the game's economy because it is shockingly different from Breath of the Wild. One of the weirdly arrows is a big change. In Breath of the Wild, I remember going around all of the stables to go to all of the locations Beetle shows up at. I almost had all of the Beetles, but I'm not sure if that makes any sense because it's supposed to be the same guy. But anyway, to buy out his inventory of arrows, I remember going to Terrytown to buy out the inventory of elemental arrows. The fuse system means that there are no more elemental arrows. There's no more bomb arrows either, but you can, like, you make them, right? You fuse stuff with properties to your arrows to make those different varieties. And that change, like, arrows are now extremely plentiful in stuff, in boxes in particular. So I've not had to buy any arrows. But the thing is, arrows was the main thing to buy in Breath of the Wild. And in Tears of the Kingdom, all of your armor upgrades cost rupees, and they cost increasing numbers of rupees. So that was a huge, like, the economy just feels very differently balanced as a result of, like, I'm not really buying arrows. Like, I'm not buying these 100 rupee a piece fire arrows or whatever they were in Breath of the Wild. It's been quite a while since I played that game. But they were very expensive is the point. I'm not forking over a bunch of cash for that. What I am, like, first of all, I feel money is a bit tighter in Tears of the Kingdom, and there's a couple of reasons why for this. One, fusing. This makes materials more broadly useful. So materials that you would previously have maybe sold in bulk to merchants in order to get money. Also, I think gemstones aren't worth quite as much as they were in Breath of the Wild. But items that you would have previously sold in order to be able to get money, you kind of want to hang on to for upgrading armor and fusing. There's a lot more, like, I've felt anyway, that there's a lot more use for stuff for upgrading armor. But also just like, oh, I don't want to necessarily bulk sell off these monster parts because there's other uses for them, right? And that's a weird, like, change because it means that money functionally is tighter. I don't have as much cash lying around because it's not like I'm rolling in gemstones, right? And I want these gemstones for upgrading armor, but then I need to sell the gemstones to be able, or other things. I need to sell things to be able to have the rupees to upgrade armor. And so there's this tension here. And it's like, oh, but I might also want to be able to fuse with that to make a stronger weapon. So there's a lot more interconnectedness with the economy, and it means that, and I think they've also adjusted prices or like the value of some various things. But it just overall has functionally made the economy a lot tighter, which means that I'm feeling it more. Like, I definitely felt initially in Breath of the Wild, I felt the cost of arrows, I felt the cost of various foods and armors and things like that. But then I figured out, oh, I can just get a bunch of gemstones and sell them and get a ton of money. And I don't feel as free with gemstones in Tears of the Kingdom in particular for selling them for giant piles of cash as I did in Breath of the Wild. And so there's a lot. I personally have experienced a much tighter economy in terms of, like, not having as much money just to spend willy-nilly on things. And like I said, part of that is armor upgrades costing a bunch. Part of that is I just don't have, like, I want to use these materials for other things rather than just selling them. There's more variety of enemies, so I'm not necessarily getting as much redundancy in materials as well as part of it. So there's a lot of different factors that have combined to make the economy tighter. I overall think that's a good thing. I never was hurting for arrows, which is also good. But I think having the economy be tighter is overall a good thing. As a player, I kind of like not having things imposed on me, but I also think it leads to better gameplay. So um, I thought that was good. The Booble Frog stuff. There's so many different things I could be talking about. It was fun getting pictures of monsters to make statues with Kilton. And Colton, his brother, who I always think of somebody else whenever my sister mentions his name. But that process of eating booble gems feels somehow fundamentally deeply painful, like eating glass. And I just, ugh. It's very uncomfortable feeling. Not That's not a criticism, by the way. I think it's good that it's very uncomfortable, but it is very uncomfortable. Of like, what is this doing to your digestive tract? But having a frog be a reward inside all of the caves, and then having the caves check off when you've gotten the booble frog, also that's a good UI thing. I enjoyed that. Let's see. I think there's a lot more like little details I could talk about. I feel like I've gotten through most of the major ones. I like what they did with Zelda and them finding a way to like revert her at the very end of the game, but also you need her to be a dragon throughout the actual playtime, so you could get dragon parts off of her for upgrading things or just to use as fused materials or whatever. I liked there's so many things that I liked about the game. I'll have final concluding thoughts in a moment. I want to finally talk about the fight against Ganondorf. I really liked this final boss fight. In particular, the multi phases as you're in the duel with Ganondorf required me to think about game systems in a way that other enemies didn't. Like, one of the criticisms that I'll have for the game as well is combat can kind of get a bit stale, and one of the problems that I have with it is enemies, yes, they get more dangerous, but they also become absolute damage sponges. And so, like, silver bokoblins are not super threatening once you've upgraded your armor enough that they're not like obliterating your HP in each hit. And so you do an attack chain on them and you knock them over, you run over to them, and as they get back up, you start attacking them again, and before they can do anything else, you final hit them with your attack chain and knock them over again. So you're just chasing them around the map as you knock them over. Having the sage spirits follow you along to fight with you was really cool. It could be a little clunky at times. I can't tell you how many times I was trying to activate one of them and accidentally activated another. Activated Reju Lightning on accident all the time when trying to climb onto Minoru. Or, I fired off Yunobo on accident quite a few times as well. But overall, I like that system. But the Ganondorf fight felt really good. The moment where his health just breaks off the UI felt really great. When he starts dodging your attacks, that was really cool. That made me have to think. And now, this fight's going to be hard for people. The son of my pastor has been playing the game, and it's been interesting talking with him about it. He's at that fight, and he's like, yeah, this fight is destroying him. So it's going to potentially be a very difficult fight for people. But I personally enjoyed figuring out, I can attack him because he jumps back and then he lunges at you in a counterattack. And if I time it right, I can basically bait him into counterattacking me. So I've basically made a feint, right? To bait him into counterattacking me so I can parry him and get several attacks in. That felt really good to like figure out, and that fight overall felt good. The final fight against Dragon Form there's the spectacle on that was great. It took me a while to figure out what I was supposed to hit, but I eventually found it. Um, but I liked a lot of those fights. There's so many more like random things I could think about, and I'm sure I will finish up recording this and instantly think about 30 different things that I'd wished I'd mentioned. But we're approaching. It's 45 minutes in. I've talked about a lot of different stuff. So final concluding thoughts is overall there's a lot that I like about the game. Breath of the Wild had great vistas, great like seeing the sunrise and set in that game was really cool. Doing it from a sky island in Tears of the Kingdom, even better. Like it just feels so like the visuals can be so cool sometimes. There's the dungeons are interesting still. The shrines often have fun puzzles. I liked the Eventide Island mechanic from Breath of the Wild. They brought that back in a bunch of shrines. A little too much if you ask me, but I appreciate that they're like, let's make you have to address this area without having your resources. There's a lot of cool stuff that they did with the Ultra Hand mechanic in those shrines that I quite liked. Zonai device parts, there's some cool stuff with those. I liked Fuse a lot. Unfortunately, so much for me of the game has a specter of damage sponge enemies being a little bit annoying, but especially just traversal. So much of the game is spent running around. This was my experience, being like, I don't want to spend a bunch of resources on making a vehicle when I don't know if I'm about to not want that vehicle anymore. I don't know if I'm about to hit a point where I'm going to want to climb a cliff and that vehicle I have to abandon. So much of the time was just spent running. Just running. Or especially gliding. And it's like, okay, I'm gliding and I'm gliding and I'm gliding, trying to get to my destination. And if like they needed, in my opinion, to, I don't know, I wanted something to make traversal feel better. And to me, that is a specter hanging over Tears of the Kingdom that unfortunately has a big negative effect on my overall experience with the game. There's so many things that it does that I like. Combat against most enemies feels pretty good. The world is... There's so many little things to find in the world. There's so many cool references and Easter eggs. I love being able to get the equipment from previous Zelda games. Being able to dress up as Fierce Deity or Ocarina of Time Link. All of these things are just... There's so many cool things that it does. And I wish that the specter of, yeah, but I have to spend half an hour running across this map. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but so much time spent running, and it's just... That hangs over it. There's just a pall hanging over it. And unfortunately, that did a lot to negatively affect my experience. And I was playing it in sessions with my sister where I'd go and I'd play it, and I'd overall enjoy it, but there's a niggling bit of like, how much do I want to play this game at times, just because of navigating things and just running and combat starting to get stale, especially with those damage sponge enemies. And I would have done more shrines. I would have done more side quests. I mean, too many Koroks are those duos where it's like, bring me to my friend. And I don't want to do those ones. I marked them on the map a bunch, but I don't want to do those ones. And that's fine. My inventory was big enough. But I kept, like, I eventually reached the point where I'm like, I want to just wrap up this game. Would I like to figure out how to get to the remaining... Would I like to know what's on the remaining tablets in the sky? Yes. Do I want to figure out getting to them? No. Navigating the sky in particular was an enormous pain in the rear end. Was it cool? Yes. Was it fun? Not as much. And a lot of that is like if I had a loft wing, sure, it would be great. I don't have a loft wing, right? And that's a Skyward Sword reference for those who are unfamiliar with that game, where you had a flying mount in that game. Um, in the we'll not get into Skyward Sword. Um, and do I love it? Speaking of Skyward Sword, when they have Fee within the Master Sword making Fee noises. Yes, I love that reference. Even though Skyward Sword was a game that I kind of am deeply medium on, um, I love the references to it. I love the music and the way that they've. I don't know what is the first one, like 86. So we're what, approaching the 30? No, 30 years was 2016. Whatever. The point is, they've had decades to build up the musical language of The Legend of Zelda, and I love how they've used that. So much of the emotion hits because they play some of Zelda's lullaby. They take these leitmotifs from across the franchise and they weave them in, and it is impactful. It's meaningful. The world feels like it's progressed and advanced in from Breath of the Wild. Again, with that oddity of what happened to all the Sheikah stuff, though. There's just so many things that the game does really well that I really enjoyed. That it kind of makes me a little sad that I kind of hit the point where I'm like, yeah, but I don't really want to keep doing stuff in this game. I'm tired of this game. I'm tired of running around. I'm tired of fighting these enemies that take a bajillion hits. And yeah, it's just it makes me sad that there's a few design decisions that they made that to me drag a lot of phenomenal decisions down. And that's just how game design works. And I hope that those things didn't drag the experience down for you. Um, if you played it, if you didn't play it, well, I mean, you listened to this review, so um, regardless. So I think that's kind of like that's the note that I have to end this on. Um, a game that I overall liked, but there was just a few very specific things that I think that they could have addressed to make it even better, at least as an experience for me. Do I think it was worth the increased price point? Yes. I think it included enough stuff. It felt big enough that it felt worth the increased price point. And I'm also sympathetic to like games not going up in inflation when inflation is happening. It means that they have to sell a lot more copies to be able to make their money back, in theory anyway. So, am I curious to see what they do with the next Zelda game? Yes. Always. It's a franchise that I've liked ever since Ocarina of Time, and especially Majora's Mask. I hope that and I like the overall Breath of the Wild formula with this large open world that you can explore with a bunch of things to find. I like our particular iteration of Link and Zelda. I know some people don't like the voice acting, the English voice acting. I'm fine with it. I like the toolbox approach where you get a bunch of stuff and then you can solve problems however you want to solve problems. I think that works really well. It lets you feel really smart and clever. There's so many things that I like with the formula. They just really need to address the transportation part. It's a big world, and traversing it takes a lot of time. And because of the change of modes of movement, because of fast travel and all these things, what they have presented for traversal just doesn't keep up with all of those changes, and things, such that you're constantly like leaving your horse behind, or you don't know when you're going to have to abandon a vehicle or whatever. And that's what made the Master Cycle Zero from Breath of the Wild so good. But I'm curious to see how they might iterate on this formula. So I think that's a good summary of my thoughts. Like I said, I'm sure I will think of a bunch of different things once I hit stop recording on this. But at this point, I think I'm just going to repeat myself if I keep talking. So thank you all very much for watching. And until next time, take care, everyone. Goodbye.